So the title of this lecture is The Birth of Stereophonic Recording. And it's actually about a much larger picture. The series of events that led to this recording is a little-known story. It has been overshadowed by the horrors of World War II, in which over 40 million human beings perished and untold atrocities occurred. But it is a development that forever changed the music world. The technological breakthrough in audio recording, which Nazi Germany was able to achieve, serves as a historical lesson, both in success and tragedy. And in order to tell you more about this story, I need to step back a little over a half a century to give you some background on the history of audio recording. Audio recording goes all the way back to 1877, when Edison created the first phonograph recorder. This was an acoustic mechanical device that took sound waves from an instrument or a voice and turned them into squiggles on a wax cylinder. Later designs were improved through electricity and a flat disc, but the challenge remained the same, to faithfully carve the image of a complex sound wave onto a physical medium. One scientist who also hailed from New Jersey and knew Edison had a different approach. His name was Oberlin Smith, and he believed that sound could be recorded using magnetism. Crudely illustrated by his handwritten diagram there, a telephone signal is sent to a stationary electromagnet, which writes a magnetic pattern onto a spool of iron, wire which was passing over it. Smith never built a working prototype, but he did describe his theory in a magazine called The Electrical World under the title Some Possible Forms of Phonograph in 1888. 10 years later, the first working magnetic recorder was built by the Danish engineer Valdemar Poulsen. The telegraphone borrowed from Smith's basic theory of that an electromagnet charged by the signal from a telephone magnetizes a passing spool of wire. Poulsen patented his invention and received the Grand Prix Award at the 1900 World's Fair in Paris. And even though he made several improvements to his invention over the next 20 years, his company, the American Telegraphone Company, never achieved much success. So during the first half of the 20th century, wire and steel band recorders based upon the telegraphone were manufactured by several companies, both in the United States and Europe. And they served mainly as communication devices, both for civilian and military life, but they were plagued by problems of low volume, a tedious winding procedure, as you can imagine, and the dangers of having to edit using a welder. Yes, a real welder. So it remained a niche market, never managing to successfully compete with the Edison phonograph. But as it turns out, Poulsen's principle of magnetic sound recording was quite good. And the challenge was to find a better medium to record onto. Fritz Fleumer was a German chemical engineer who worked for the tobacco industry. And he discovered a way to bond bronze powder to paper to create the stylish gold-tipped cigarettes of the 1920s. Fleumer decided to apply the same principle to a magnetic recording device, which he built in 1929. And he called it the Lautschriftträger, which means sound record carrier. Doesn't sound as good in English. Fleumer's genius was to replace the wire spools with reels of paper to which he glued carbonyl iron shavings. Now, even though Fleumer's recorder had poor fidelity, it caught the interest of AEG Telefunken in Berlin. Now, AEG was practically a subsidiary of General Electric, but it was the biggest electronics company in Germany. AEG knew they could improve the electromechanical parts of the machine, but they needed help in developing a more robust record medium than paper. And for this reason, they entered into an agreement with BASF IG Farben, which was a well-known chemical company. And of course, IG Farben was the company that manufactured the diabolical Zyklon B used in the gas chambers of the concentration camps. There's always a negative side to this. Now, the scientists at BASF replaced the paper with an acetone-based plastic film, which was already being used in the film industry. And then they substituted the carbonyl iron shavings with freshly ground ferric oxide, finely ground. And this compound was refined so that it could accommodate short wavelengths or higher frequencies. Now, to eliminate a manufacturing step, they also added an adhesive to the compound, which they could then spray directly onto the film. And so, magnetic tape was born. From this cumulative effort came the very first tape recorder, which AEG called the magnetophone. Not exactly the greatest name in the world to call a product, but that's what they called it. And here's a picture of the first magnetophone from 1935. This is the K2 model. And you can see it looks almost exactly like a tape recorder from the latter part of the 20th century. Now, the magnetophone was shown at the 1935 Berlin Audio Fair to great acclaim. And at first glance, the press saw it as a device for office dictation or interviews with its 20-plus minute recording time and its ability to edit and erase. This was something completely new. But others saw in it sort of a glimmer of the future. And there's one article I found from a magazine, or from a newspaper called Aus aller Welt, which sees the machine as a home recording device. And I'm quoting now from the article. As testing has shown, a radio instead of a microphone can be hooked up to a magnetophone. If the radio is playing Mozart's Kleine Nachtmusik, the magnetophone can be put into motion and the iron particles will capture the gratifying music. After a few days, you might want to record something else. So at the push of a button, the tape rolls past the magnetic record head, the old recording is erased, and you can record a tango, a foxtrot, or a waltz onto the 0.05 millimeter thick tape. This seemed to be quite extraordinary, sort of predicting the future when we get into the era of the 80s when people are taping radio on their cassette decks. Now, strangely enough, the magnetophone was largely ignored in the United States, and for that matter, the rest of the world, even though AEG shipped 2 machines to Schenectady, New York, for evaluation in 1937. And reports show that the General Electric engineers were not impressed at all. And even more amazing, over the next 8 years, AEG sold over 2,000 units of varying designs to the German Wehrmacht, both Army and Navy, without even an eye blink from Allied intelligence. So what I'd like to do now is play you the very first magnetophone recording, or the first official one anyway.